Welcome to First. I'm Shirley Min along with Mark Eichman and Nichelle Polston. Delaware wants to expand the business opportunities below the water, but aquaculture isn't everyone's idea of progress.
Progress could be an advertising idea for this Wilmington entrepreneur, a report on how driving your car produces advertising.
And for years, Steve Martelli was a fixture on the Wilmington political scene. After being gone for a few years, he's got a unique perspective on the state of the city. First, your public media news magazine starts now.
Oyster harvests were big business along the coastal U.S. up until the 1900s, when disease and water quality started to kill off the oyster industry. Well, in the last 30 years, there have been attempts to revive shellfishing, and one of those attempts is in Delaware. Carolyn Beeler of the WHYY Health and Science Desk and The Pulse has our first look. Hi there, Carolyn.
Hi, Shirley. So Delaware is trying to catch up in the oyster aquaculture industry. There's a push to set harvest areas in a few of Delaware's inland bays, but not everybody agrees with their placement.
About $1 million worth of oysters are now farmed on the New Jersey side of the Delaware Bay, but state laws have long made it impossible to farm oysters in Delaware's inland bays.
I'm sorry to have to say that in the 50 states of the United States, Delaware is the next to last state in the country to be doing this. So, every state along the eastern seaboard, with the exception of Delaware, has commercial shellfish aquaculture activity.
John Ewert has researched oysters since the 1970s and has spent years trying to bring oyster and clam aquaculture to Delaware. Due in part to Ewert's advocacy, in 2013, Governor Markell signed legislation to allow for shellfish farming in Delaware's inland bays. State officials have identified 442 acres in Rehoboth Bay, Little Assawoman Bay, and Indian River Bay to potentially open up for oyster and clam farming. But some home and business owners on those bays are not happy with the placement of those plots. David Green helped start the Coalition to Save Beach Cove.
I realized it was a bad choice, and so I went and knocked on doors, literally, and started finding people that were of like mind, and before long we had 7 large communities, roughly 300 homeowners who said, yep, you're right, let's go.
Green calls Beach Cove, where he lives, peaceful and serene, and doesn't want it to be marred by up to 24 acres of oyster beds, with PVC piping and buoys sticking out of the water. He says they would be as close as 200 feet from his dock.
I'm not against oysters, I'm not against agriculture, in the right spots. We're very concerned about the environmental impact on Beach Cove, about the navigational challenges, the recreational challenges, aesthetically. Of course, it's not going to be very pleasant to look at, and it's just a bad spot.
Green's group says some of the proposed beds are in an unmarked channel. Blocking it would prevent boats from navigating out of the cove into Indian River Bay at low tide. After a review, the Army Corps of Engineers has suggested state regulators get rid of 5 of those plots to allow for boat navigation.
It's a compromise. It's not a great compromise, though, because all of the other concerns that we have all remain.
In Little Assawoman Bay, inland from Fenwick Island, Jennifer Adams Mitchell is worried shellfish beds would hurt her kayak and sailboat rental business.
Where they've located the lease areas are on either side of our opening here, and they're pretty close to the shoreline where they put them. So at low tides, kayakers and paddleboarders are not going to be able to go around them on the inside of them, on the shoreline, which is where we like to keep all of our paddlers.
Adams Mitchell is also bothered that she didn't know about the proposed shellfish regulations until they'd already been written.
Our problem with it is that so many of the people that live and work on the bay were not included in the initial decision-making process of where to place the plots. I think there is room on the bay. I just don't think where they put the plots was at all the best place to do it.
John Ewert, though, says not only will the oysters bring money into Sussex County, but they'll improve water quality as well.
They filter the water, okay? That's how they get their food. So they help, clarify the water, which allows sunlight to go, deeper down and helps submerged aquatic plants, which is habitat for, small fish and invertebrates. And then they themselves, when they form reefs, provides structure and habitat for a lot of little critters.
Carolyn, the issue seems like it's been kicking around for years, but where does the shellfish aquaculture program stand?
So the Army Corps of Engineers has to approve the final Delaware regulations, and they've gotten back to DENREC with their suggestions. Now it's up to state officials to tweak their regulations and permitting procedures and get final approval from the Army Corps of Engineers. What I'm hearing is that the state might submit those final regulations to the Army Corps as early as November. In that case, John Ewert says watermen could have their first oysters in the water by next spring.
So how big of an industry could this be for the state?
It's likely that it's going to start small and grow slowly here in Delaware. John Ewert likes to liken the potential here in Delaware to that in Rhode Island, where the industry is worth about $5 million.
Wow, a lot at stake.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. You can follow this story here on First and at newsworks.org/Delaware. You can follow Carolyn Beeler on The Pulse. Listen to it Friday mornings at 9 and again Sundays at 10 a.m. on WHYY-FM 90.9.
Steve Martelli left Wilmington City Council to work for the State Department in Washington. He came home for a week last month where he gave us his thoughts on the Wilmington scene and the 2016 election.
What I have seen from my perspective as far as the city of Wilmington as a whole, I mean, I see a lot of great development. I mean, they got since I've been gone, they've got the West End down there. They've got the IMAX Theater down there. I drove down to the riverfront recently. I was just blown away by the progress that I've seen down there, and it's awesome. And it just proves to me what a lot of us have been saying for a long time, which is that Wilmington is a place where anybody with a good idea can make great things happen, and that's what we were hoping to make happen. But the other side of that coin is the one thing that a lot of us have always said, and I think it was probably the linchpin of my time in office, was we got to get a handle on the crime situation.
When you come back and see all the things that are happening, whether it's on Market Street in downtown and all the restaurants that have been popping up and residentials that are even planned along there, do you think as somebody who has moved away and gone and worked in faraway places like Mexico and Cuba, now to coming back, do you think that folks who have kind of stayed here throughout maybe even just take that for granted or don't really realize how much things have changed?
Absolutely. I think a lot of times, I think folks in Wilmington get kind of caught up in their day-to-day, and it's easy to be negative and say, oh, this isn't going to work, or this doesn't look good, or this, that, and the other thing. But when you come into town after being away for 3 years, and you see the progress on Market Street, you see residential buildings, people living in downtown, people living on the riverfront, these awesome buildings, these awesome communities, these awesome neighborhoods, it's incredible to see.
Are we almost to the tipping point of their successes and the people moving in downtown, where the perception, because I think there's definitely a perception problem that the city of Wilmington has, especially when it comes to the crime versus what there is to do in town. Does their success sort of combat that perception?
I think it helps significantly, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Wilmington definitely has a perception problem. The city definitely has it. The downtown definitely has a perception problem. And you know what? You got to have a positive outlook. You got to really want to make things happen. And that's the reasons why I like things like Downtown Visions and the things they're doing. They're promoting Wilmington and saying, look, these are the great things that are happening in Wilmington. And yeah, I think what Buccini Pollen has done really has helped kind of skew the perception in the positive favor, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done by the city to try and enhance the perception. And taking an adversarial relationship with local media is not the way to do that. You really need to say this is what we have to offer and promote that.
Anything that you can say as far as what needs to be done to address the negatives, to address the crime, the violence?
I think you really need, in my opinion, and the experience I've had in Mexico, I think was a phenomenal experience. And I got to be in the city of Monterrey, which had some challenges of its own, but I got to witness how they responded to those challenges, the city itself, through the recruitment of policing and through the deployment of policing. And I really think that we here in the city could kind of take a page out of that book and maybe look at our deployment. I think we've got enough police officers. I don't know if they're deployed the right way. I don't think that they are. And I think we need to look at community-based policing. We got to do a lot better at proactively addressing these issues.
With all that's going on in Wilmington, for good and for bad, kind of optimistic on the direction the city's heading, that the future can be bright for Wilmington?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think you've got some really good, strong leaders in city council specifically, that, you know, the folks that I've been able to see. You've got some folks in the city administration who really want to see things progress. I think Jeff Flynn, you know, the director of economic development, is a great guy with vision and really innovative, and looks for different ways of doing things. Is what you need. And, you know, yeah, I'm very positive. And
so next for you, heading back to Cuba for more State Department work?
Heading back to Cuba for more State Department work. You know, I'm looking forward to what 2016 has to offer here in the elections, here in the city. Looking forward to getting back to work, you know, in Havana and promoting the reestablishment of diplomatic relations there.
And you'll be in Cuba for those elections. You're not going to come back home and put your hat in the ring for anything here, right?
It'll be, you know, it'll be interesting to see how things unfold. Nothing's out of the question.
All right, very good. Steve Martelli, former Wilmington City Council member, now working for the State Department in Havana, Cuba. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Mark.
Coming up on First, remembering the Dover landmark Kirby and Holloway. They still have a decision to make about the future. And we take a step back in time. Baseball, as it was played back in 1865.
What do you get when you combine the words car and advertise together? The answer, Karvax. The owner of the company is a Delaware guy who noticed that there was a channel in the advertising market being ignored. And that's when Karvax was born. To you, this may just look like an ordinary car with advertisements posted all over it, but it's not. It's equipped with much more, including a GPS monitor to determine the number of times the ad is viewed.
I didn't know what I wanted to do. You know, figuring out what you want to do for the rest of your life is a really hard decision to make. And I kind of stumbled into this and fell in love with working on it 3 years ago and haven't looked back since.
For Mac Nagaswamy, it all started with a vision in college that turned into a reality before he graduated from the University of Delaware.
I was amazed that marketers were using buses to carry an advertisement and billboards to carry advertisements, but here's this other channel.
That channel was the private vehicle owner. According to Nagaswamy, he thought, why not use everyday cars to advertise, which are getting more exposure than buses and billboards combined?
We're able to get exposure in areas out of home, which no other channel can reach. You know, billboards, you have to play with the inventory that's given to you. Transit, you have a set path. But what the unique ability of this out-of-home car advertising channel is to be able to get your message seen in the other areas that can't be reached.
The company also hires drivers willing to travel with the brand on their cars, from soccer mom to office worker.
It's a very varied spectrum of people who this applies to. But the common denominator of what they all share is just this mindset of it makes sense. I drive a lot. I like advertising. I like this brand. I'm okay with advertising for it. And if it helps pay my gas bill or whatever, you know, different people use the funds for different reasons, why not?
One of those drivers is high school teacher Jen O'Neill, one of the first to sign up for the job.
In the beginning, on the first rap, people were like, why are you doing that? Like, why did you do that? And this and that. I wouldn't do that with my car. Now, people are asking me, where can I do it?
Today, the company continues to build, working its way to clients outside of Delaware, now taking Karvax to the big leagues.
The next step that we're going to take is definitely Philadelphia. It's a much larger market. There's a lot more brands that are centered in that location who are trying to reach the DMA of Philadelphia and the surrounding regions.
If you're wondering if the advertisement decals ruin the cars, the answer is no. The wrapping actually protects the vehicles. Nagaswamy also shared that he and his employees wrap their personal cars in their client's message as well, just to show that they really care about getting their client's message out.
The new U.S. Supreme Court session begins every year on the first Monday in October, so we've invited Rod Smola, the new dean of the Widener University Delaware Law School, for some perspective. Thanks for being here, Rod.
Good to be with you, Mark.
So the calendar is already set. What's kind of the high-profile case? What's going to get the attention?
Yeah, you know, the way the court works is it announces a number of cases as the term starts, and then it adds cases as it goes along. So we may still find some exciting cases that get accepted down the road. Right now, I think the most interesting case on the court's calendar is a challenge to affirmative action in higher education. It's a case that the court will be hearing for the second time. It's called Fisher versus Texas, and it involves the question of the extent to which universities are going to be able to continue to use race and ethnicity in making their admissions decisions. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see a dramatic cutback and the court say either you can no longer use race and ethnicity at all, or you can use it, but in a very limited way. You can only use it to diversify your student body if you've exhausted every other conceivable way to achieve diversity, and you meet a very heavy burden of proving it's the only way to get there. So I think it'd be a very important case. It could have a profound effect on universities and colleges around the country, and that's in terms of the kind of culture wars that we always think about in the Supreme Court, probably the most significant case right now that we know is going to be heard in the fall.
So unlike the past session, not quite as many
Unlike last year where we had Obamacare, we had the same-sex marriage decisions, enormously important decisions involving religious freedom. At this stage, there isn't that kind of cultural case, although if the court were to abolish affirmative action or dramatically curtail it, I think that would be very important, and particularly in light of the identity politics that we have in our country right now, and debates over immigration and ethnicity and so on. That could have an enormously important effect even on the presidential race.
And there's still a chance for something Obamacare related, maybe even immigration.
You never know. Absolutely. I mean, very, very often cases will percolate, and sometimes around the holidays or even in the early spring, the court will take an enormously important case, and that'll suddenly be the spotlight.
A lot of times we think of the Supreme Court sort of operating in a bubble, but we can't ignore the fact that there is a presidential campaign well underway now. Does that have an impact on what cases the court will take, that they don't want to get involved in this and maybe in a political year?
You know, who knows? I don't know that it has an impact on the court. I think the justices will do what they want to do. And I doubt a justice is going to avoid taking a case because they don't want to make a controversial ruling in the middle of a presidential race. But I think what happens in the reverse is, as important cases get teed up, and the cases that have been decided over the last few years are enormously important, and any new case the court may take, that becomes fodder in the presidential race. And you certainly saw that in the Republican debates. You saw a number of the Republican candidates really laying it on Chief Justice John Roberts as not being conservative enough and saying, you know, had it been my pick and not your brother, Jeb Bush, right, we wouldn't have John Roberts. May have been a little bit of a bum rap. There are some folks on that side of the aisle that will never forgive him for that.
And there comes the conversation of, I'll have this litmus test for whatever kind of justice I will appoint should I become president.
And of course what we know is that you can have any litmus test you want, and it doesn't necessarily work out that way. So there have been many, many situations where Democratic presidents thought they had reliably liberal Supreme Court justices, and they turned out not to necessarily be so. And certainly the reverse is also true, where you had Republican presidents appoint justices, and they got confirmed by the Senate thinking they would be stalwart conservatives, and they would either migrate toward the center or sometimes the more liberal wings of the court. So it's by no means an exact science. People have a tendency to be very independent once they're on that court.
Is that maybe the litmus test of what a good judge is, not necessarily what a presidential candidate would want, but somebody that, regardless of their leanings, looks at the law and judges it based on the Constitution?
Right. You know, if it depends on who you ask. Now, you ask me, a lawyer who's litigated in the Supreme Court and argues cases in front of judges all the time and who teaches constitutional law, I like someone with some independence. I like someone who says, I'm not, you know, in the United States Senate now. I'm not in the administration. My job's to listen to the arguments on both sides, think about it, follow my views as what the Constitution means, and try to call it as I see it.
Finally, personally, you're new to Widener, new to the Delaware Law School here. How have you been adjusting? And we understand you'll be taking the Delaware bar.
I'm going to take the Delaware bar exam. So ask me in a year how I'm doing. But you know, I love it here. I love the community. I love the general region. I'm delighted to be here. Happy to be part of the community. Happy to be doing things like this with you, and hope we do it a lot.
All right. Well, we're glad to have you here. He is Rod Smola, the new dean of the Widener University Delaware Law School. Thanks for being our first person this week on First.
My pleasure. Thanks, Mark.
The Kirby and Holloway family restaurant was Delaware's diner for decades until a devastating fire shut down the business. For a long time, the family said the landmark would be rebuilt, but now they're not so sure. This past summer, demolition crews trashed what remained of the Kirby and Holloway family restaurant in Dover. The charred shell of the once bustling diner on Route 13 sat untouched for more than a year. An electrical fire gutted the place in February 2014. Now, the sign and a lot of questions are all that's left. Chief among them, will Kirby and Holloway be back? Earlier this year, I met with owner Jim Gray to hear firsthand the diner's fate and learn a little about its history, too. So, Jim, we're at the Governor's Cafe. Is it a little weird for you to be ordering coffee in a different place?
Very much so. I keep wanting to bust tables. I don't know, you know, or sweep the floor or do something.
Established in 1948, local sausage manufacturers Russell Kirby and John Holloway opened the joint, filling a restaurant void on Route 13. A young Jim Gray bought the place in the early 1980s. In its heyday, the restaurant served as many as 75 meals an hour.
Yeah, I was young and just wanted a challenge and saw it as an opportunity. And we put a lot of effort in it.
Effort that paid off for hungry locals and travelers, not to mention Jim and his wife.
We raised a family there, which was important. All my children, 8 children, have worked in the restaurant, much to their chagrin to an extent, because they wanted to go to the beach.
Tell me about the fire. What happened?
It was a half hour after we left, and we had an old outlet that we never used, ever. And apparently it had been smoldering and heating for they don't know how long. Just a little bit of current in it. But it was finally got to the point where it wore down the insulation. It's one of the original outlets of the building. And it sparked, I guess. And I got dressed and went in, and I got there, and there's fire engines all around the place. Smoke and flames coming out of the ceiling. And I knew it was serious.
At the time, Gray said the plan was to bring Kirby and Holloway back to life. But sadly, after fighting an 8-year battle with colon cancer, the 68-year-old died in May. And so did plans for a rebuild, at least for now. Gray's son, Phil, emailed me saying, quote, "We've decided as a family to take a step back and evaluate our options. We're unsure what we'll do at the moment, but we don't have any intentions to rebuild this fall." The Grays own the land, and Phil says when the time is right, his family will decide how the Kirby and Holloway legacy can continue. Philip Gray says this is a very difficult time for his family, and ultimately they didn't want to rush into anything so soon after his father's passing. A difficult decision, and I'm sure a disappointing one for the thousands of regulars Kirby and Holloway fed over the decades.
150 years ago this weekend, a group of Wilmington lawyers formed the Diamond State Baseball Club. The score of the first game was 69-29. That sounds more like a football score. The game has changed, but to keep the traditions alive, there is a new group dedicated to that long ago style of play. First Experience takes you to the old ball game.
Welcome for a game of 1864 baseball between the Diamond State Baseball Club and the Mohican Baseball Club of Kennett Square.
It's the 150th anniversary of baseball in Delaware. We're the Diamond State Baseball Club. The Diamond State Baseball Club was actually formed by a group of attorneys from downtown Wilmington, and they formed the club on October 2nd, 1865. It was the first club expressly for the purpose of playing baseball games. so much of this is the same. It's still 9 fielders, it's still 9 innings, there's still 3 outs to a side, it's still 3 strikes, you're out. We don't use gloves. That's a real education in and of itself. We do usually wind up with about 1 broken finger a year. The pitcher is throwing underhanded. The fly balls can be caught on 1 bounce and the batter is out. Another rule difference is fair and foul balls. Fair and foul is determined by the first bounce. The balls are made from 1 piece of leather. It has an India rubber center, so it's a little softer. These are balls that are made like a ball that would have been played with in the 1860s. The bats are much the same. There was many advertisements in newspapers back in the day. They would advertise how thick it was at the barrel, how thick it was at the handle, what kind of wood it was made out of. These are made to specifications from actual advertisements of the 1860s. We don't have actual pictures of the Diamond State Baseball Club. We do have descriptions in the newspaper that they wore black pants, a blue and buff colored shirt, and a blue newsboy cap. This is sort of our best guess of what they might have worn. What I look forward to is getting out here and playing ball with the guys. I'm not gonna lie, everybody likes to hit, right? You know, and when you take that bat and you swing it and you hit a ball nice and square, that feels good. A lot of us do it for the history of the game. You never know who's going to show up. Someone sees it on the Facebook page, someone sees it on the website, and they show up. It's kind of like Joe DiMaggio. They would often ask Joe DiMaggio, why do you play so hard all the time, even when it's the 8th inning of a game that's 12-2 or something? And he said, maybe there's somebody in the crowd that's the first time they ever saw me play. I want them to think I play hard. We come out here and we try and put on a historically accurate game and keep it that way at all times. You never know who's going to be here. What I hope to take away from the experience is that we've put on a historically accurate game. They're learning something about the history of baseball. There's a lot of little things that happened during this particular time period that we're depicting that made baseball evolve into what it is today. And so what we're trying to do is get out there and have some fun and get some exercise and also teach something to someone who shows up.
That inaugural game was played October 7th, 1865. On October 10th of this year, the group will play an old-time game at Rockford Park. Go to DiamondStateBaseball.com to learn more. We thank the Delaware Historical Society for all of the photos in the story and this Diamond State Baseball Club scorebook from 1865.
Next week on First, the impact of the DuPonts on Delaware arts and culture. It's our Delaware Today content partner story. And say hello to Mitch Lyons and how he creates interesting art through a process called clay monotypes.
That is First for this week. We thank you for watching. For Carolyn Beeler, Nichelle Polston, and Shirley Min, I'm Mark Eichman. Have a great week.